How do I even start this? How do I even start this? Oh. Microsoft's new, I say Microsoft's, but well, let's say Microsoft's new text editor, console text editor called Edit, which is a very interesting project, I think, written in Rust by this dude, the awesome Windows Terminal guy, Leonard Hecker. The first issue that's still open here is about plugins for this text editor. And Leonard is talking about a pretty traditional setup for the plugin or the extensions with a small editor core and then plugins as shared libraries or DLLs. And I saw this and I recently started really using the terminal and the command line, and it's been quite a journey doing that, using the command line, learned a lot, and I've had my views changed a lot about what productivity looks like for coding and development. I've seen things I didn't know before from learning to use the command line or the shell. Actually, for me, it has a lot to do with the shell, these insights. And I think there's a danger of conflating two things here. It's a common story that people come to the command line, they start learning Vim or NeoVim, they start their config, and then they get really sucked into it. They learn a lot about how to create their own productivity. That's a common story. And you get very addicted to this. You start ricing your setup, kind of a common thing. I think there's a danger of conflating that kind of a story with what happened for me, because superficially it sounds like they should be very similar, but I think what happened for me is actually quite different. And I think the understanding that you end up with about the command line and about how you build productivity on the command line and how you make the computer do things for you, I think that the difference between these two, this more common story and whatever happened with me, is worth exploring, explaining. But the problem for me is that I learned so much in such a small amount of time, so everything's very compressed. It was like a breakthrough, like insights into programmability and what that has to do with productivity. And it's an insight into what computing came from, which is the Unix model of tools and the command line and the shell. What is the shell? I don't think people understand what the shell is very well. I think people do have an idea of what the shell is, but they do what the shell does or is supposed to do, but they do it in their text editor, which is why my alternate title for the proposal that I posted on the Microsoft Edit GitHub Issues, where I wanted to talk about this different experience of extendability. The subtitle here is, "It's tempting to live in your text editor, but have you tried living in your shell?" I've lived in my text editor, and then I had this breakthrough, and now I live in my shell, and dare I say it's better, for reasons that are hard to capture. They're hard to explain. So I wanted to make this video to have a little demonstration of something that's very big. A small demonstration of something very big. I don't even know if it's going to be evident, the thing that I want to demonstrate. I think it might not even be very evident. The whole insight part of it, the whole change of perspective that I had, but I'm going to try. I'm actually going to read a little bit of the proposal or the issue as I wrote it here, and it's going to summarize a little bit of what I've just said. Recently, I dove deep into and embraced working on the command line. Yes, I know, I'm late. And consequently, I've experienced insights and dramatic changes to my notions of human-computer interface and productivity. Like many, much of my usage of the command line revolves around the text editor, but I think my experience is different from most and worth reflecting on. The difference lies in the approach to building productivity by complementing and extending tools. In the following, I don't intend to make any claims to originality, only to cast light on, after having discovered for myself the ways of the old ones. I have another video that I should be making where I actually go through the small little tweaks that I made in my shell that I think demonstrates the whole philosophy of what the shell really is, which is very often, I think, misunderstood. A lot of it is taken for granted and misunderstood at the same time. Like I said here, after my personal 0 to hero on the command line, I now think that all productive development environments require scripting with an interpreted language, and that the significance of this is both completely misunderstood and taken for granted. And the shell is the scripting environment. And the point is that you don't really have interactivity below the shell. The shell is the first principle of interactivity with the computer. And the problem is it's almost always skipped. The first layer of interactivity of your computer is almost always skipped over. And often you skip over the first layer of interactivity on your computer to go into your editor. And what do you need in your text editor? You need interactivity. So you put a scripting language, which, like I say, I think it's required for productivity to have an interpreted language at the fingertips when you're using your computer. So you skip over the first layer, the base layer of interactivity, the fundamental layer of interactivity on your computer. You skip over it just to end up in a text editor where you need to have interactivity. So you put a scripting language in your editor. But something happens there, something that's hard to explain. What I mean by something happens there is you start accruing a lot of negative effects by skipping the fundamental layer of interactivity and then going and making silos everywhere, interactive silos that aren't united by the fundamental layer of interactivity, which is the shell, but instead is isolated in each application. Something starts happening. One of the things that starts to happen is that, well, like to almost be philosophical, as a principle, you have chosen unintegration. You've made a first choice, a first axiom of not integrating when you do this. You're not participating in the fundamental interaction layer of the computer. You've said, screw that. I'm going to have my own little island, and I'm going to decide everything that's inside or on that island. That's your scripting environment inside your text editor. It might not seem like a big deal, but that fork in the road where you choose not to integrate with the fundamental interaction layer of your computer has knock-on effects, huge knock-on effects, huge effects down the line, consequences down the line. And it's very hard to explain what those effects are, but it's very easy to feel if you backtrack on that choice and you insist on using the shell, and if you insist on using the fundamental interaction layer on your computer. That's what happened to me. That's what I mean by my personal 0 to hero on the command line. I'll explain that in not this video, but another video that's more related to the specific things that I did with my shell. If you roll back that choice, that fork in the road, and you actually you insist on the fundamental layer of interaction on your computer, which is the shell, if you insist on that, then you feel very powerful. You feel a lot of productivity. I've been so addicted to text editors and applications that have their own scripting language and the power that gives you within that application. Super addictive, very fun for a programmer like me. I've been there and I did not know what I was missing out on. And I think it's very hard to end up there and then at some point later backtrack. You get so much power from having a scripting environment like that inside of an application. You're very happy with that. But then if you do backtrack on it and you insist on the shell, I did that and it's better. It's better, it's more productive, it's more powerful, it's more integrating. I can never go back, just like you can never go back to a text editor without a scripting environment. I can never go back to needing individual applications to implement scripting. And instead, what I want, my whole work environment, do you see what I mean? My whole work environment is fundamentally scriptable. That's the shell. And the problem is you need this. And so you end up making your text editor your whole work environment or development environment because you need this. You need to have an interactive scripting environment with an interpreted language. That's one of my insistences. I insist on this. Because you need this, and you don't understand the shell, and you don't want to learn the shell, and you don't start using the shell, you end up inside of your text editor, and you start making your text editor. This is the thing that I'm going to demonstrate today. You have to reinvent and re-implement everything. Everything. It sounds, you're not gonna believe me, but you are reinventing a whole operating system. You're reinventing the whole interface to the operating system, not a whole operating system. And you're doing that, you're re-implementing everything in a manner where your fundamental principle, which has already been decided by you, is non-integration. That's why you end up having to re-implement everything. Because you've principally, philosophically chosen not to integrate with anything that's already there. So you have to reinvent the outside world inside of your software. This is abstract. It's very hard to demonstrate. It's very hard to explain, but you will feel it if you do insist on using the shell. I'm gonna do a small little demonstration of a tiny fraction of this problem that I'm talking about, of re-implementing everything. Okay, so I'm scrolling down in the discussion that I've had on my little issue. I'm talking about this to the developer on the edit repository, because I want them to be able to understand this thing which is so hard to explain, so that they may make a more informed choice about what kind of extensibility they want to implement for their editor. Mostly because I think maybe this editor, this Microsoft Edit program, it may potentially affect many people for a long time. This decision has very big effects, and because I think Edit, the program, can have big effects, that's a very nice multiplier. So that I felt compelled to talk about it here. But the latest post on the issue here, I'm going to read this paragraph. I won't necessarily be able to formulate that any better today. It isn't an easy thing to convey. It's an altogether different way of seeing these issues that is inherently concerned with extension and programmability as principles unto themselves, and therefore also concerned with how to do it right. And not just with regards to a particular application like a text editor and its plugins. And here comes the thing I'm going to try to demonstrate today. A particular issue, pull request, and commit, these three here, as well as your comment here with the link, about quote, empty state plus open folder plus fuzzy finder, has me inspired to do a simple YouTube video with a demonstration of this thing that's so hard to formulate. Maybe that will help the discussion, and I'm praying for some motivation to do that. And here I am today with some motivation to do that. Let's go look at the comment that inspired me the most to do this. It's an issue which concerns the functionality of exiting the whole application when there are no other buffers left to close. So you got three documents or files open. You close one, you close the second. When you close the third one, what happens currently in Edit in the program is that, well, we can just have a look at it. And I'm guessing you're actually going to see some of the stuff that I'll be talking about later. Here is the editor, the Microsoft Edit right here. So currently we have this file open. We're going to open some more files. When we close the editor, now we've got two left, and then we're going to close that editor, and then we've got this one left. When we close this last one, the editor is in an empty state like this. You have to press close editor one more time like this, or you can of course press quit. That's what the issue is about. Close editor exits the application if there are no other buffers to close. This person wants this action of close editor not to close the application at the end when there are no buffers left. Only choosing exit should terminate the application. And then there's some discussion about what Visual Studio Code does. The developer eventually, the thing that most convinced him was that holding down Ctrl and W as a hotkey to close the editor on the key repeat, when it just, you know, it does the keystroke rapidly like that, it's going to close out of the whole application, because at the end it's going to actually exit edit instead of just leaving you in this empty state. So that sort of convinced him to remove this function whereby the application exits when you try to close an editor and there are no editors left. And then I wrote that I disagree with the decision to make Ctrl-W not close the program when there are no more open buffers. In fact, on a different issue, I go the other way, where I think Ctrl-W should close the program when it closes the last buffer, not with an additional keystroke afterwards. So I don't like the empty state. Either there are buffers or the application is gone, in my mind. That's how I want it. I also write, this can obviously eventually be a simple setting or key bindings thing. I don't know that I should supply any further rationale for this. Both preferences are valid. One point I want to add to this discussion is to be wary of overall blah blah blah. That's not so important. So the developer, Leonard, replied to my disagreement. Let's see what he wrote. This doesn't matter yet, but long term, I think it's useful to have an empty state with no documents. For instance, a feature where you can open a directory instead of a file. It then presents you with a fuzzy file finder. For example, Nginx configuration file consists of a set of files, all within etc Nginx. It would be useful to be able to open etc Nginx itself. Already here, my shell spidey sense is going off, which I've just recently acquired. This shell spidey sense is very new to me. Happened in the last couple of months when I was just learning to use the command line in the shell. Okay, actually I realize that everything that I wanted to really discuss is in this first paragraph. He says that he thinks it's useful to have an empty state with no documents, for example, to open a directory and then to be presented with a fuzzy file finder. Is it obvious from the foregoing discussion, my explanation, what I think the problem is here? Maybe not. This is what I'm going to demonstrate. The problem is you're re-implementing. You're re-implementing something that already exists at the fundamental interactive layer of the shell, inside one program that you run in the shell. You know, why should a text editor I think the reason why we think like this is because of the GUI paradigm, the graphical user interface paradigm that we're so used to. And I write a little bit here about my reasoning for why I think we think like this. I'm not going to read all that now. Why should a text editor have you start re-implementing the whole universe without realizing it, without having an idea that maybe it doesn't even have to be like this? It seems like such a good thing to have, this functionality. Well, in fact, it is such a good functionality to have that it's part of the fundamental interactive layer of your computer or of the shell. It's already there. Why is it being re-implemented? It's because you're not thinking like that. You're just not thinking to use what's already there. And the problem is you end up with unspecialized, it's like your re-implementations are both specialized to your tiny little domain, but that means that your implementation is also not specialized in the sense of it's not an exploration of the best way to implement that functionality. It becomes an exploration of what's the best way of implementing that functionality within this software. But that means you're getting something that's, in a way, it sounds tailor-made for your software. That's good. But it's not the best way to open documents, to browse a directory, or to have a fuzzy file finder, because that's not your focus. So you don't get, in a sense, you don't get specialized functionality. Okay. So why implement an empty state? You need to have an implementation of that, which, as you can already see, it has affected the interaction with the text editor, its state and the closing a buffer and what it does to the application at the end of when there's no buffers and so on. But you have to start thinking about that and design something for that. And the developer wants an empty state where you can open a directory instead of a file. And he's so right. And it's because he wants a fuzzy finder, you know? That's because the fuzzy finder is extremely useful. But why are you putting it inside? Why are you re-implementing it and putting it inside your program? You're losing out on something that's very hard to grasp yet. Let's go look at the terminal here. Let's go to some kind of, well, I'm going to show you. I already have a fuzzy finder. I use fuzzy. I already have one in my shell. Why do I need one? Why do I need one inside of the text editor? An additional one? Why is there a reimplementation of a fuzzy finder inside the text editor? Like, you have to think differently, because yes, there is a reason for why you need the fuzzy finder inside of the text editor, and it's because the text editor doesn't integrate with the shell. It's architected in a way that makes it a closed off silo that doesn't participate in the fundamental layer of interactivity of your computer. And you don't need a fuzzy finder, but you really want the functionality that the fuzzy finder gives you. So you got to put it inside your software. But that way of thinking, you're going to have to put everything that's useful inside of your editor. Anything that's useful for working and for your development environment is going to be in there. And one of the insights for me is that in a productive development environment, you need an interpreted language. That's because you need a malleability that you need to make it. So you need to implement everything that's useful inside of your software. And what that ends up being is a scripting language at the end. In the end, because then you can re-implement everything that's useful for you at home instead of the developer doing it. So you're putting a shell inside the text editor that runs in a shell. Why? Okay, this is a little script that I have. These are the most recently used directories. Let's go to somewhere. What's a good one to show off here? Maybe this one, a little bit large prompt. So the developer here has a demonstration of these different ways of thinking. They're struggling with the design decision to have an empty state because they want to eventually have the facility of opening a directory so you can choose a file that you'll actually edit in the text editor. And here's another script that I have, J for jump. And it uses fuzzy, the fuzzy finder that I just showed you above. And it lists the recently edited files in this and the subdirectories. And this is what the developer wants to put inside of Microsoft Edit, wants to re-implement that. And part of the burden of convincing you of this different way of thinking is that each and every one of these, it's like whatever. Like, okay, so he put a fuzzy file finder inside the editor. It's whatever, like it's not very much bloat. But everything is going to be like this. Everything is going to be like, because you principally chosen an architecture or a philosophy that doesn't integrate, that doesn't try to be useful to other tools. So here I'm using fuzzy. It's just looking at the most recently used files in the subdirectories right here. And when I press enter, I'm dumped into the file and also on the line that I was last on right here. I can go up to, I'm up here on stars add side, and then I exit the editor and you see the list just updated again with the most recently used file at the top. This is in the shell. You don't need this in the editor. Why do you need it? I'm saying why do you need it, not as in why do you need this functionality. You need this functionality. Why does it have to be in the editor? To understand why I'm asking that question, it has to break some of your assumptions about how to use your computer, how to use the command line. If I go into the file again, as you can see, it's just centered, but it's on that line, the last line that I was in. And when was the last time I was inside this file? I don't know, it's a long time ago. Let's jump somewhere else, like this project of mine. Actually, another thing to show you is the jump script, the little shell script that I have that uses the fuzzy finder here. Here you can see there's a different list when I just do the jump to. These are the most recently edited files in this directory and subdirectories. But if I do JJ, I don't know, it could be called anything, but then it gives me a global list. These are the files anywhere on my system that I last edited. And the reason why I can make what you're looking at is an integration of tools, not a specialized tool. It's not a specialized tool that you're looking at. It's not a tool for your most recently used files. This is an integration of fuzzy and nano, which is the editor that I use, because nano should have a file here. What's it called? So of course this is a fuzzy picker, so you can search and there it is. This is somewhere in my list of most recently opened files. There it is, not too long ago. Nano keeps a file that contains paths, line, and column number of anything that you open in Nano. And because Nano does that, I can integrate its most recently used files into other tools, like the fuzzy picker right here. And then I just do a little showing only files in the Nano file position history file that are in the subdirectory of where I'm right now in the current working directory, or globally like this. I get it. It's hard to think what's the big deal. And I think that's what I need my next video to show, because that principle I just showed you of the tools making their state, in this case, Nano, making the files that it opens and the lines and columns, making its important state available to the fundamental interactive layer in the file system. That's something that you start to understand. You start to understand what the file system is. Why is there a file system? Why is that part of Unix? Why is it so important that things are files? Start understanding that as well. When you don't say that everything has to consume your application state by being a script that the application hosts, and instead you serve your state, then there are so many things. This is such a small little example of jumping to a most recently used file. It's something that I use a lot because as the developer of Edit is onto, this is a very good thing to have. Be able to open a directory and fuzzy choose a file. It's really, really handy. But why is your editor doing that? Your editor shouldn't be doing that. And mostly because when you design it like that, I can't even explain it any better than that. One thing that I'm interjecting here in post-process, as I watched back my video, this also felt useful or relevant. The J tool, it uses, as I showed you, the most recently used files list that Nano keeps. So if you've got something that you've been working on here in this directory, then it shows you those files, so it's easy to jump to them like that. But sometimes you go into a directory where you haven't opened anything yet, like maybe you clone a Git directory or whatever. I have another script for that, which is very similar to what you've just seen. O for open, it could be called anything. But what this does, it recurses the whole directory. So it shows you all the files that are in the directory or subdirectories, not just the ones that are present in the recently used list. And of course you can search for things here, search for .c files or .h files. Yeah, so this one is not limited to only recently used files. It uses find, so it goes through every file in the subdirectories. And it also I do some excluding, like not including the Git directory and some other build related stuff, so it doesn't spam me with files that I don't even care about seeing in the list there. And just wanted to add that in there. It's in some ways a bit closer to what Microsoft Edit kind of picker they're doing. Now back to the main video. Lastly, I just want to show you another reason why you don't need your text editor to keep track of things for you inside of the application. This is a very similar thing. I already showed you actually earlier. It's just short for CD, you know. It just shows me the recently CD'd directories on my system. That one's a little bit interesting. It's dependent on this. When you use the shell as the fundamental scripting environment, then you can do things like this. I've overridden the cd command to just call the cd command with whatever arguments that are passed. But also, if the cd command is successful, right afterwards, put the directory that you changed directory to, just append it to a file. So now I'm keeping track of all the directories that I'm cding into. There's something about the nature of the shell being your first layer of interaction that allows you a degree of customizability that you cannot have when individual software thinks that its customizability should be a silo of its own, should be something that it controls. The software should not control its own integration in a way. That sounds very weird. It shouldn't own its own integration. It should integrate up, not down. It should not just expose its state internally to some privileged scripts. It should instead expose its state to the wider system, because then there are integrations and customizability available that is unheard of when you're thinking within the GUI paradigm. If you're thinking within the GUI paradigm, then you're not even going to realize the amount of productivity that you can build if you think differently. I'm going to go look at one more issue here. So this was the developer's comment about empty state plus open folder plus fuzzy finder. And my thing that I'm trying to demonstrate here is that the empty state is your shell's prompt. Why are you re-implementing it? The open folder is one of the most fundamental tasks of the shell, navigating the file system and listing its contents that your shell already does. And the fuzzy finder This one, I sort of want to, I think that you need a fuzzy finder. You need something that allows you to interact with your system in terms of lists. And the fuzzy finder is that. That's something I think is actually missing from the basic toolkit of the Unix command line. You need a fuzzy finder. You need a list, an interactive list utility. So download a fuzzy finder then, you know. Don't put fuzzy finding, don't create a specialized fuzzy finder for your text editor or your other software. Instead, find ways of exposing the state you want to be fuzzy picked to the wider environment. Anyway, so that was my little quip about this comment right here. Don't know if it was very obvious because it's such a... There's one more thing to mention here, and it's that I am way more productive on my system because my empty state plus open folder plus fuzzy finder, that thing is uniform across my workflow. I'm not in edit, I'm not in some other application and using their special, it's the same every time for me. When I want to go look at files that I've recently used or files that are in this current directory in order of recently used, or I want to jump around my file system, it's uniform across my workflow. Here's another example. Oh, I just realized that you couldn't see any of that. I'm gonna have to show that again. So here's the file that I'm choosing. And I find this symbol right here, this one. Just put my cursor somewhere in this word. I'm gonna use a keybind that opens a pane in Windows Terminal, and then in that pane, it runs the fuzzy finder, but with different data. It runs it on the tags file that's in the directory here. But this is just a shell again with all the symbols and their locations in the files right here. And you can see it's a uniform interface because it's the same thing that I use for jumping to directories. It's the same thing I use for most recently used files. Let's go to there, finds the file here, can look it up like that. And now I'm back here. Yeah, anyway, so the point there is just that instead of there being a different fuzzy picker here or there, or a different way of jumping to folders or files, it's completely uniform because I integrate it at the fundamental interactive layer, not in a software silo. Okay. So that's another point, I guess, the uniformity of not having every little piece of functionality re-implemented over and over and over and over again in different ways, in different applications. You don't want, like, there's another thing, you don't want that, which is why you end up stuck in your text editor, and therefore why your text editor has to do everything. You don't want 4 different ways of looking up directories, files, symbols, searching in files, when you're debugging, when you're doing diffs, working with Git, when you're using make. Let me show you there's another script. I'm running make in a little script, and I'm just putting the appropriate lines into a fuzzy finder, and I just press enter, and there I am, right where the error occurs. And when I exit, it remakes to see if you've changed whatever was wrong. And I'm not in my text editor. I'm in the shell with a fuzzy finder integrated with the make utility that integrates or that runs the compiler. And it's completely uniform. This list here, and you can search whatever, just see errors just by typing error like that. It's completely uniform. Well, that was the point I was making about how directories or files or most recently used things, or when you're diffing or make compiler output, you want that. You really need that. You don't want 3 or 4 different ways of reading and navigating compiler output. You don't want that, which is why when you get into your editor, you want to use your editor for everything. And so your editor is going to have a compiler output parser and a tags, needs a tags implementation to navigate your symbols because you want it to be uniform. You want your interface to be uniform. So everything gets put into the editor because you're thinking wrong. You should put it in the shell because that's the fundamental interactive layer. And so your editor or whatever software shouldn't perpetuate that error of putting everything inside of itself. It should put itself outside. Yeah, you get the point. Okay. There were 2 things that I wanted to pick up here and make a little demonstration of. One is that comment about the empty state, open folder, and fuzzy finder. I've talked enough about that. I've talked too much about that now. But also this particular issue, pull request, and commit also inspired me to make this video. Let's have a look at this case. Here's an issue, a bit awkward to change drives on Windows in the Open Save dialog. Let's read the issue here. I would expect to be able to navigate up using ... ultimately to a list of drives to select from, but it stops at the root of the current drive. I did discover you can select the file name. Okay, so I know what the issue is. Edit is here. The version I'm using is 1.0. This has been fixed. The issue has been fixed in 1.1. We're gonna have to use this older version to show you what the issue is. Open a file. This is the path that we're currently on. I'm gonna go up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And now I'm in the C drive. I cannot go up to the D drive. Sorry, I can't go up and then choose a drive. I do have a D drive. Do you see where I'm going with this? Can you guess why this is one of the things that I feel demonstrates very well the things I'm talking about? It gets back to one of the points I made earlier about how traversing the file system is one of the core functionalities of the shell. And you're just not ever gonna... So now he needs to make a drive picker. But you have a drive picker. You just do that. So now file system navigation, you got to re-implement that. And the drive, you know, like the peculiarities of the current working directory in each of the drives on Windows. Now your application has to model that. You end up re-implementing everything when you don't integrate with what's already implemented. And then there are design... You got design, like, how do you say? You got to choose how to implement it. Like, is the drive browser a drop-down? Is it a top-level list? Is the top-level list the special case of just navigating folders? You got to check for that. So he did, I mean, this is obviously, if it has an open file and you can navigate the whole file system, of course it needs to be able to choose the drive on Windows. But just don't even have the problem. Go the other way with the whole thing. And once again, oh no, he has to, oh no, you have to implement the drive selector. It's not such a big deal. Like we just see here, like it's not such a big deal. It's a couple of lines, it's 50 lines. But like what I said here, the compounding, the unexpected and accidental compounding negative effects, the additional complexity, you're too busy not being able to think differently and being on the treadmill of, oh, obviously this is useful functionality. We do need that. And I can't deny that. It is useful functionality. You do need it. And it's already there. It's already there. You just have to think different. I'm not so sure this video is convincing because I've barely hinted at what I'm trying to say. It's very hard to explain and demonstrate. And okay, here I've shown two tiny little cases of these principles at work. I think my next video, if there will be one, where I don't focus on these things that I have learned in the context of the Microsoft Edit, when I don't focus on that, but instead just focus on my shell productivity, and I would go through the actual scripts that I made that you've seen in action, but you haven't seen the scripts. And oh, hang on, I skipped a whole thing here. Back to the issue of the drive selector, and I did demonstrate what you can do with the, you already have a drive selector in the shell. If I start edit here now, I'm on the D drive. If I go here and start edit, now I'm in the C drive. You don't need that inside of edit unless you're running the text editor not in a shell, and that's a use case I don't think you should support, even though every GUI application lives in that predicament of not having a fundamental unifying scripting platform underlying every GUI application. That's not the case in the GUI world. I don't think when you're making a command line text editor that you should support that use case, but you don't understand that you haven't shifted your mindset to the command line. Anyway, so yes, the terminal, it gives you lots of tools to traverse the file system like I just did now. But I do want to show you another more powerful. I showed you the C script, the most recent directory script, which is using that little piece of shell magic, just recording your change in directory. And that's the list that's shown here. What's it actually called? It's ash history. Yeah, here we go. I'm just going to delete those. So now you see that the C and D drive just went away. That's because this script uses a fuzzy finder and just connects it to that file. This is one way that I most effectively jump around my file system, this recent directories thing, but that's not what edit was doing here. This is like a file explorer, more like, with folders. And can you search? No, you can't search, but you can probably, no. you can't like jump, you can't type and have it. I have another script here that's called browse. It literally just appends path components and shows them in the fuzzy picker. And I want to show you what that means. I have it on B for browse, and it looks like this. This is the fuzzy picker with output from ls. The current path is up there in white. I can type like this. If I press enter, if it's an executable, I launch it. Let's go look at, well, actually I have some pictures here. And you can't see that, but that opened this picture in Windows's preview application. Dev, see, here are my projects. This is a file browser. And it's just in the shell. It's just ls plus a fuzzy picker in a loop. So it's very fast to navigate here. This is, you know, now I'm back in one of the folders I already showed you earlier. And so now I'm there. This is another example. I just stitched two tools together. Two tools together. The just ls, which is already there, and yes, a fuzzy picker. I do think that you need to add a fuzzy picker to your toolkit, and that's about it. You need your shell, you need your text editor, and you need a fuzzy picker. So why does edit need a... It's not even why does edit need a file browser. It's almost like what you just watched me do there. Why do you even need a file browser? What I just showed you isn't a file browser. It's ls and an interactive list. When you're thinking with this shell, things change. And so I made this video because I experienced a lot of power from doing things this way, and I want users of Microsoft's command line editor to be able to experience the same power. I think this is the best way of doing things. I'm not one to say too much about what's objectively best or not, but I think this is best, this way of integrating with the shell. This is what my proposal was about. It's hard to demonstrate. There might be another video about some other integrations, maybe call it integrations, how I'm productive in the shell. Not so much in the context of Microsoft's edit project, but just my shell productivity. I hope this was useful, and I hope that it was not just useful, I hope this was comprehensible so that the developer of the Microsoft Edit project can get some ideas so that they can empower users of Microsoft Edit. It's a concern of mine because maybe Microsoft Edit is going to be a very big thing in the future, and then I would want for the users of this program to have the same kind of power that I experience on the command line. Thanks for watching.